Hello, and welcome to A Soulful Revolution, a podcast at the intersection of spiritual transformation and social change. I'm your co-host, Lauren Grubaugh-Thomas, a priest, writer, spouse, and twin mama living on the ancestral homelands of the Arapaho, Ute, and Cheyenne peoples in what commonly is known as Littleton, Colorado.
And I'm Hannah, mentor, mother, agitator, friend, and sincerely curious person. Today we are here with Dr. Charon Hribar, who is a song leader, cultural organizer, and social ethicist. She serves as the Director of Cultural Strategies for the Kairos Center and is co-director of Theomusicology and Movement Arts for the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. With more than 2 decades of experience, Dr. Hribar empowers leaders to integrate rituals and arts into organizing efforts. As well, we have the Reverend Dr. Liz Theoharis with us, a theologian, pastor, author, and anti-poverty activist. She is the executive director of the Kairos Center for Religions, Rights, and Social Justice, and the co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. Reverend Dr. Theoharis has been organizing in poor and low-income communities for the past 30 years. Together, they are the authors of the recently released book, We Pray Freedom, Liturgies and Rituals from the Freedom Church of the Poor. To both of you, I offer a welcome.
Thank you for having us. It's awesome to be here with you.
Yeah, really grateful to be here.
We're so delighted that you're able to be here with us, and it's become our practice to ground all of ourselves at the beginning of every episode with a question about the state of our souls in this moment of struggle for justice. And so myself and Hannah will start by answering the questions because we're springing this on you, and then we'll give you a moment to reflect on what is the state of your soul at this moment of struggle for social justice. Hannah, where do you find yourself today?
I was in my yard yesterday with my younger son, and it wasn't until I was all the way in the yard doing something, farting around in my slippies and whatnot, that my son realized and pointed out to me that there were shoots of grass that we had never seen before. We've only lived in this house for a little over 2 months, and again, it was news to me that there was grass there. It had previously just been very muddy, very dirty, a project I had already put to the back of my mind. And I've been thinking about that so often, about just being surprised by the possibilities. We already spoke before we even pressed record about the victory of Zoran Mamdani, Mayor-elect Mamdani, right? And about
Woo!
What right?
Glory!
and right what it
Amen.
what it means to be hopeful and to see that. So that's where I'm at today. Grateful.
Yeah, I feel that in my soul, Hannah. I was joy scrolling yesterday, just seeing all the beautiful posts from people, certainly friends and acquaintances and social media folks in New York City who are just reveling in the achievement of the incredible grassroots campaign that got a Democratic Socialist elected, and who's also a Muslim and who is South Asian, and 34. He's younger than me, which is like makes me feel all kinds of things, but mostly really just joyful feelings of delight that somebody has been able to break through the political stagmire that we have found ourselves in, including within the Democratic Party. So that feels joyful. That feels like a real boost of hope for my soul, really feeling a Dickensian, but feeling that like idea of the soul having wings, of having feathers, that Emily Dickinson talks about. That feels like how my soul is today, having a little bit of buoyancy, and maybe being able to set out into flight, and feeling very grateful for that. So it's my privilege to invite our guests. Charon, let's start with you. What's the state of your soul in this moment?
Well, I have to admit that my soul often speaks through songs. And there's been a song on my heart all day, and I think it's in the vein of, both. We just came off of Dia de los Muertos and All Saints Day, and so I've been thinking about the revolutionary leaders that have come before us and are preparing us in this moment to face the struggles that we are facing. And thinking about, stepping into this moment and having a victory like last night. I live in New York City, and so being able to see hope and being able to see people pushing in their own parties too. And so I actually just wanted to share this little verse of the song, and lifting up Fannie Lou Hamer as I do, as someone that was, someone pushing both on the ground and in the Democratic Party for freedom and justice. So we say, I am a revolutionary. I should have been dead and gone, but Fannie Lou said go on. I am a revolutionary. We're still in the fight and we're still alive. So that's where my soul is right now.
Thank you. Liz, what about you?
Well, it's the problem of following Charon. Because then she brings my soul to a different place. So I also live in New York City and have been very excited about this whole campaign. The huge new section of voters, folks coming together across these different lines, who all need affordable. Because I think the other place my soul has been this week is in the snap cuts, and in just the deep pain and hardship that so many people were already in, uh, and are in even more right now. And often every day there is something else that just takes aim at the very people the Bible lifts up, and the very people that are of most concern to our faith traditions, and just tramples on people's hopes. And so it's amazing to get to be right now in a moment where you can see that there's another path, there's another way, that people are so hungry for, a society where everyone can thrive and not just barely survive. And in fact, so many people are not surviving in this moment. And so I think I'm sitting somewhere between, like hopeful, but in these very hard times.
Liz, that reminds me of the Alice Walker quote that comes from a posthumously published book of her poetry, the title of which is Hard Times Require Furious Dancing. Like the depth of our hope must be proportional to the depth of our experience, and that we have to cultivate ways to continue to fill that well.
That's why I'm hanging out with Sharon.
Sharon, as you were singing, I was just, yes, yes, yes. I was actually just thinking as you were singing, okay, what part of the movie soundtrack is this? Like, where are we in the story? Because I think for those of us, at least for me, I have felt so despondent often by realizing, oh, we're not as far along as we thought we were in the struggle for justice. Oh, we haven't made as many inroads in helping people recognize the basic humanity. Okay, so where are we in the story? And you're singing, and I just felt like whatever character we are has put on their leather jacket and they've got really sturdy shoes on this paved road, right? We don't know how far the road extends, but there is a defiance and there is a steadiness to that beat that tells me that, like, oh, we're walking this road together, but we're stomping it. Like,
That's
let's march this beat together. Can you send
yeah.
us that song?
Yes, it's actually a brand new song, so I will
Awesome.
send it to you, as well as we have a bunch of others that I think are absolutely necessary to keep us, because this struggle isn't, it's not a linear, and it is a long struggle, and so we have to have these kind of resources to keep us on that path towards justice. And it's why, a lot of the resources in this new book, We Pray Freedom, are here, because we need to have resources for our communities to sustain these struggles. And we have to be able to meet all of the range of moments. And so, yeah, we have to have these songs in these times.
Can you tell us more about that? Like, how did your passions and longings, the intersection of y'all's friendship and expertise, how did it manifest in this piece of art, this book?
Well, it feels like it's super timely. And this process, and even just this trying to pull this book together and website and other materials, took a long time. And it's rooted in 50 contributions from 80 contributors from struggles that have taken place over the past couple of decades. Um, and so I think what has been always at the center of the kind of movement work, and ministry that we're a part of, and this kind of long genealogy of poor and low income folks organizing, for a change in our lives in the here and now, but also bigger transformation, of the whole society, has been this kind of ritual and culture diving into the power of our faith traditions, and the best of them. Um, and some of the rituals and some of the liberatory, teachings, but also just like the way we embody those in action with our bodies in the world. And so, we start off, for instance, the introduction, with a set of kind of faith protest vigils, that Sharon and I were at, 20 years ago, with restaurant workers in the wake of September 11th, who are organizing, for dignity and fairness and better wages and working conditions. Um, and that friendship, the work we've been doing, and all of the folks that are in this book come out of this history of kind of what we talk about as a tradition of the Freedom Church of the Poor. Now, throughout history, there have been, many conversations and instances of a Freedom Church. Actually, the AME, church is sometimes known as the Freedom Church, right? We kind of enter that conversation once Dr. King, in when he's calling for a poor people's campaign in 67 and 68, talks about the kind of form and formation that poor people's campaign should take, and he talks about a freedom church of the poor. He also talks about a nonviolent kind of army of the poor, multi-generational, interreligious, all of these things. And so, we started to act out in the world these rituals. We started to gather some of the songs and prayers, and realize that they were really helpful, um, both to tell those particular stories in that context, but also for the kind of social justice movement, protest in the world that is taking place. And so we started gathering them, and realized that they should be there for people to learn from and to then make their own, and make, use of these ones, but also stand up other ones in the world.
I wonder if you could give us a sense of how the book is organized. You have these sections that are about remembrance, healing and transformation, mourning, taking action together, celebration, and liturgies of the people. would you talk about the way the book is organized, the kinds of resources that people will find as they either linearly make their way through the book, or if they choose thematically to jump in? What are the ways that you hope people will engage with this book and make use of it?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think when we started working on this book, at one point, as Liz said, it took a few iterations and different folks working on it. When we got to this stage, we had originally kind of thought of just having resources collected of just kind of straight up prayers and songs and litanies. And what we'd started to think about was what we needed to really hold those prayers and litanies and songs were the stories of the communities that they came from. Because the context of this organizing, I think, is really powerful and matters. And I think it helps people both to really connect and understand and realize, like, to see themselves in the stories. It's not just a tool, but it's actually like, this is our lives, and we are looking at how are we holding our lives, holding like our communities as sacred, reclaiming practices in our communities. And so the book is really laid out. The first 5 chapters that you were mentioning, of remembering and mourning, really tell the stories of communities and different rituals that kind of we need at different moments, as I said earlier, in our lives, right? And having public spaces, I think, in addition to personal spaces to hold these kind of moments, and to recognize that especially in poor and dispossessed communities, that they are practices that are often denied to us, and so that this was a way to show communities who have that poor and dispossessed communities are holding these practices and are reclaiming and claiming these practices and claiming the work as sacred. And so, as I mentioned, the first 5 chapters tell those stories and offer the different rituals and liturgies through those stories, and then also ask questions to the reader to invite them in to imagine what these kind of rituals would look like in your community. Because, as Liz mentioned, it's a book to be used, really. They can be used as is. They could also inspire new rituals to be born, or for us to reimagine rituals that come out of our various traditions, and kind of resituate those rituals. Many of those rituals come out of communities of struggle in their origins, right? And so for us to remember that, and to bring those to life in a new way through that remembering. And then the last chapter is an offering of just more rituals and songs, and tell a little bit shorter of a story. But we also have a website where folks can go and kind of link to the different organizations that are represented and tell the stories, like have the bios of all of the different contributors. And really encourage people to use both the book and weprayfreedom.org, especially because there's so many songs in the book too. That's a place you can go and hear the songs and learn them and use them in your community. But it really is meant to be interactive, and to just be something that encourages us to think about how we are showing up, how we are gathering, how we are protesting, how we are building community in this moment.
Hi, listener. Hannah here. I wanted to offer a moment to pause partway through our conversation. If you will, join me in a bit of a guided meditation, just to check in for our bodies and spirits. Close your eyes, if that feels comfortable to you, and consider what you've heard already through this conversation. Consider how that feels in your body, if it's something you can name, and if it is, think about it as if it were something you could hold. I invite you to consider this thing that you're holding perhaps like a piece of jewelry that you're wearing around your neck. It might be something that's new, precious, expensive, rudimentary, dense, however you might describe it. And take a moment to interact with that piece of jewelry.
Would you like to straighten it on your neck? Adjust it somehow? Do you want to take it off? Put it down? Are you comfortable carrying what you're holding through the rest of this conversation? What will it mean if you do, and what will it mean if you don't? I invite you to consider these things and make a decision that reflects what you need in this moment. We'll carry on with our conversation, but for now, I just want to say, I'm glad you're here.
I am not only living in Austin because I am in residential seminary, but I have also done the majority of my, ministry previously in small churches of little to no means, which tend to be kind of underserved in many ways, I would say, and undertended in many more ways. As I was reading this book, like something that just kept coming up for me was what a delicious little offering this is for churches who don't have resources. I could have just seen my people, my various congregations and groups going, "Oh, did you know we could do that? Oh, did you know we could do that?" Like I was thinking again, because like the whole last chapter, as you all were already describing, it is just, it's a snapshot. It's a testament and a testimony to what has been. And I think often people who are impoverished are not afforded the privilege of connection, of understanding where they are in relation to their siblings' struggles as well. And I could just hear people saying, "Oh, so that charism of our community, that particular thing that we can't get over, that could actually be a thing for us." Have you all heard that from people? Like, what kind of responses have you heard, or what type of engagement have you gotten with the work?
I think when folks are freed up to imagine, um, that for one, you can pray with your feet and in protest, but also just that like that you can mark important goings on in people's lives. And that you do that with the full authority of people with a morality towards liberation and justice. Like I just think it's very exciting when we have brought some of these rituals to different communities. Folks have just taken them and run with them. We were just in Seattle and Tacoma and Portland, Oregon, and like different parts of Washington State and Oregon State, in churches that are pretty used to a common lectionary and like doing things the way they do things. And like the freedom that it gave people to be like, wait, we can do this in worship. Oh, and then we can bring um not just our worship, but like our whole selves, to all these other places. I, I mean, I think it's been really exciting or a couple of folks that are whose rituals are in there. Just to see them then alongside of other folks's rituals and observances and seen as the holy work, the sacred work that they are. But so we had some colleagues at Wild Goose this summer, and they were practicing some of these litanies and rituals and liturgies, and a couple folks that had submitted entries to this were like, wait, this is amazing. Like we get to just do this thing that we did before, but in this other context, and it gets to add meaning to it. And but yeah, it really is that spirit of like, wait, we can do this, and that this is important work, right? I mean, liturgy meaning work of the people, right? Just that like the things that we do in the world to make it better or to take care of each other, like that is sacred work. It's not just that we're going to move people with our words, but like with our actions and our stance in the world. I mean, that matters. So yes, I think we are hearing it, and I love that that's the response that you had, and that you could bring.
Similarly, I found myself going through the book thinking about my younger self almost a decade ago when I was in my last year of seminary, and a Black neighbor, J.R. Thomas, was killed by police in Pasadena, California. And I was with the leadership of friends of mine at the seminary, specifically a friend of mine named Andre Henry, who's an artist and activist. We started something that we came to call a subversive liturgy, which was a gathering at the Pasadena police station to offer lament on the steps of the institution that had brought this harm to our community and to J.R. Thomas directly and to his family. And we were really grasping at straws in terms of resources. This book didn't exist yet. I'm sure there's other resources that you have drawn on that have existed, but we were really creating stuff from scratch, which was beautiful to be able to create liturgy from scratch, drawing on what we knew of our traditions and being able to kind of use some of the frameworks of our traditions. I'm Episcopalian, so we were like, okay, like what's the structure of a Eucharistic service and how would that work and what are the basic components? But to have had a resource like this in 2016 would have been revolutionary for me and my friends as we were trying to figure out how do we bring just the robustness and the depth of our grief to this institution. How do we do that in a way that's sustainable and creative? And we continually found ourselves asking, how can we be more disruptive? And so the question that I want to ask you is about the ways in which these resources or others like them that you've participated in over the years and led, how have you seen public liturgy? How have you seen rituals that are justice oriented and subversive that are being done in unconventional spaces actually catalyze social change?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's many, many examples, especially in this book and beyond, of that being the case. I think there's a few I could lift up, that I think are in the book, and one being a powerful story of homeless organizers here in New York City, from an organization called Picture the Homeless. That is an organization of, homeless or formerly homeless folks that, as they were organizing in the city around housing rights and civil rights, one of their founding members, passed away. And it was at that time that they came to find out that where homeless folks and other poor folks were being buried was in a place called Potter's Field. And that the Potter's Field was actually run by the Department of Corrections in New York City. And so, if you had a family member that was buried there or a friend, you couldn't actually visit. You couldn't actually go and pay your last respect. You couldn't do a burial. And folks were being buried in mass graves. And so as they were organizing on these other areas of organizing, they started to organize, around a Potter's Field campaign, and to, as one of the leaders, Rogers, would say, how we are treated in death is indicative of how we are treated in life, right?
Amen.
And if we have to, respect and honor the lives of our peers. And so they took on this campaign, and we were working with them. This was, I don't remember the year this is now, early 2000s. And, working to be able to go and actually visit Hart's Island, where the Potter's Field is located. And as part of that, we actually had a memorial service at Union Theological Seminary, where we had a memorial for Lewis Higgins, who was the leader that passed away, as well as other leaders and poor folks that had died, and calling out the fact that people are anonymously, buried. Like, basically, his family wasn't even contacted because he passed away on the subway and he was just taken there. And so, the idea that we are claiming our humanity, we are claiming the sacredness of our people through this. And so, the memorial was one piece of it, but there was regular kind of, organizing also happening, and that pushed the city to actually allow first a group of faith leaders that worked alongside Picture the Homeless to go and hold the first memorial service at Potter's Field, and then to have a regular time when families and others, it opened it up for others to be able to go and actually be able to pay their respects, at Potter's Field. For folks that had been buried there. And so, that whole process of lifting up this, the importance and sacredness of life and all life was part of, changing the city policies and practices around, our ability to honor those that had passed. So that's one example. Like I said, there's so many. I was also thinking of the story that Liz mentioned around the Restaurant Opportunity Center of New York that was organizing restaurant workers. And we talk about in the beginning of the book, the story of the persistent widow was a sermon that one of our folks, Reverend Jeff Mansfield, led in weekly protests that were prayer vigils. There was a law that was saying that folks couldn't organize protest. And so instead, with seminarians, the restaurant workers and seminarians would go and weekly protest outside these series of restaurants in Midtown that were stealing wages and, not allowing sick days and, all of these things. And so through that persistence of weekly prayer vigils in public, of airing the grievances of the workers and supporting one another and allowing folks to come out and call attention to what was happening, because often what happens is, you could get fired or let go when you're making, an uprising around what's happening. And so having people there physically, supporting the workers every week was able to, kind of win back wages for many workers that were part of this group of high-end restaurants in Midtown Manhattan. We actually had a whole group of we had a gathering of folks from around the country that were in town for one of the protests, actually from other organizations like the United Workers and the Michigan Welfare Rights. And we actually took the whole group of folks down to one of the protests together. And we were actually on our way to another function where people were all dressed up. And so we were all kind of together, dressed up, having this beautiful prayer vigil in front of one of the restaurants, standing with the restaurant workers of poor folks from all over the country, kind of coming together and sharing solidarity. And again, being able to, at the end, kind of see the positions have to be changed. Not that they necessarily wanted them to, but they were able to win these cases.
Oh, that's exquisite.
Well, that's such a visual, though, for solidarity, right? Which is that people who might otherwise be identified as patrons of the restaurant, oh, you all are dressed up really nicely, you must be going to have a nice dinner. In fact, we are going to, and the phrasing that you use there, to share in solidarity, right? We're not going to share in a meal. We're going to share in the deliciousness of solidarity with the people who would otherwise be serving. Like, that is radical. Like, I want another portion of that, please. Solidarity for me is just a core theological value. I would imagine that's probably true of both of you all as well. But what would you say are do you think about it like that? Like, what are your core theological values?
I mean, solidarity definitely is one, and that solidarity across lines of division in particular, that I think what we see in the Bible and our sacred traditions, as well as what we see in powerful movements for change throughout U.S. and world history, are when people are able to come together across the lines that empire tries to stand up to get in our way. And so, kind of that mutual solidarity, that like seeing that kind of each one teach one so we can reach one more, and that, an injury to one is an injury to all. Um, is core. I mean, it's absolutely central. I think connected to it is also a value of those that are most impacted, leading the way, as moral and political and epistemological agents of change and transformation, right? Like, and that where change comes from is from the bottom. And so I think about so many stories, but again, that if we go back to that persistent widow, because we were just on it, one of the things that I think is theologically so central to that story. I mean, for sure, it's her persistence. But she's petitioning, this powerful judge, or like, and what I think is lovely is that, he doesn't really change his mind. Like, it's not that he sees the error of his ways at the end, and then he grants justice. It's that, the text tells us, he's worried that she's going to basically give him a political black eye. Um, and so she wins justice by her agency, her power. And so I think that's another really important kind of theological value, uh, for our work, which is that those who, would be free, as Frederick Douglass says, must strike the first blow, right? Those that are in pain know when their pain is relieved. And what's, I think, a real commonality between the rituals that are in this, collection, and so much of the work we do, is that they're coming from folks that are directly impacted, who are, again, not just doing something to make their lives better or their families' lives better, but who are actually building and a part of a larger motion, a movement, to kind of end that injustice for everybody.
I'm curious about the evolution that you both have undergone. Perhaps this may be my assumption, so I'm curious about what your story has been in terms of being in deep solidarity. Like, what are the relationships that you have had, or the personal experiences that you have had of poverty, of injustice, that have allowed you to enter into this space from a positionality of solidarity with those who are most directly impacted by the economic and racial injustices of our society?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I grew up in a small steel town in western Pennsylvania, just north of Pittsburgh. And, it was definitely a town where, folks took care of each other in the midst of struggle. My families both came from very poor and working class families, and including when I was 5, the mills shut down, and so it had a very deep impact on the community that I come from. It's a very traditional Rust Belt town, and seeing kind of the loss of jobs that never really came back, and we were Catholic, and the church was definitely a place that people turned to, as well as just kind of the taking care of your neighbor, and that's kind of the framework I had as a kid of like, okay, you do for each other, you take care of each other, but having a deeper understanding of like, where does this come from, and why are we experiencing the things we're experiencing, came much later. And I think jumping far ahead into when I ended up in seminary and meeting folks, like Liz and others that we helped to found the Poverty Initiative, and folks that had come out of years of organizing poor and homeless families across the country, that came out of the homeless union movement, came out of the welfare rights movement. That transformed me to understand it wasn't people in my community's fault that they were experiencing the kind of hardship that they were experiencing, right? And getting to see people who were, coming into that work and organizing with folks all over the country, I had a huge, privilege of getting to connect with people and see that there's something we could do about it. It also just didn't need to be this way. It wasn't supposed to be this way. And theologically, God didn't want it to be this way, right? And so it wasn't only that we could provide for each other or offer charity to one another, but it was a transformation of seeing in real terms that, that actually this is a world of abundance. And when we can live into that, that's what we're doing, as like poor folks will do that because we have to. But it's actually how society should be structured. And, the work of poor folks organizing across the country at a time where in seminary, learning about and diving into liberation theology, it was a real life, understanding of that, right? That we have to understand that these problems were not just, individual problems, but they were massive social problems that would require a massive social movement to respond to them. And so, I think as over these 20 plus years that I've been doing this work, that the transformation has really come through the relationships of meeting people all over this country, and all over the world, who have been in the struggle of transformation, and saying that a different world is possible, whether it be folks fighting, for, like we said, restaurant workers, or whether it be folks fighting against the school to prison pipeline, or farm workers in Immokalee, Florida, or, shack dwellers, the movement in South Africa that we have worked with, and seeing, just how all over, like, folks are rising up. And if we can connect those struggles, like, that is the vision, right? That is the vision of God's kingdom here on earth, of when folks have the abundance that God has offered.
Beautiful. Liz, what about you? What's your origin story?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, there are many different threads to it. I mean, I was raised in a movement family. When I was a little girl, all I did was go to protests and actions, and and welcome into our house, movement leaders from across the world. And my mom would say things like, I'm not trying to raise baseball players or ballerinas, like you have a role to play in this world. And I have, both because of my family's situation, and then after I left home, have experienced, poverty and homelessness, and the lack of health care, and the need to work all kinds of, like, low wage jobs, for much of my life. And so, I really kind of entered the movement both from a moral position, in terms of this upbringing that said that, it's similar, like, we take care of each other, we try to make the world a better place, but also from a position of having to get some of my needs, spiritual and material needs, met. A- And I think it's been really powerful for us to have people from many different walks of life, um, be a part of that work, and not just to have people with resources and with means be there as supporters or allies, but to see that even their liberation is wound up in the liberation of everybody. And I think, coming from uh, a genealogy, of poor and low income folk organizing, um, I think there's been a real blessing to to coming, being raised kind of politically by these leaders. And I think about someone like Johnny Tillman, who was a welfare mom from Watts, California, who was one of the leaders of the National Welfare Rights Organization in the 60s and 70s, you know, really the largest membership organization of anybody in the Black freedom struggle in the 60s and 70s. 30,000 dues paying members, welfare moms and their kids, who actually built up a power and an organization that 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 pushes someone like Richard Nixon to have a position of a guaranteed annual income, to really be kind of more progressive, quote unquote, than any Democrat sends him, because of the power and organization of welfare rights leaders. Where Johnny Tillman talked about, the kind of organizing model that I think we still come from, and that touches into this question about where we come from and our genealogy, which is that, organizing, kind of survival organizing, has to meet people's spiritual and material needs. It has to be politically and financially independent. And it has to be led by those that are most impacted, and it has to be open and welcoming to everybody. And so I think I've just been really lucky. I didn't know Johnny Tillman herself, but many of her closest colleagues were the folks that were mentoring me, back when I was a teenager, in this work.
It strikes me that what you were talking about earlier, taking this book into different congregations and introducing them to the liturgies, is essentially what you were just talking about, right? Which is that liberation is afforded to each of us, and it looks different, but that those of us who are following Jesus understand that we who understand that to be the truth of Jesus are figuring out what that means in real time, which to me is like when you share this knowledge with somebody else, they realize, oh, I can be liberated from this. It's almost like these liturgies. People might not know they're possible until they see that they're possible. It's the same thing with the liberation that you all are also sharing with people, which is that it is an inkling of what's possible for us, for all of us. That's incredible. Ladies, is there one nugget that you might leave our listeners with, whether it's an inspiration, a story, a refrain, a meditation, something that sustains you all in this work? Like, leave us with one or two or three.
Liz, I know you talked just now, but I'm going to leave us with the last refrain, so I'll let you go first.
So I'm thinking, and this is a little longer than a refrain, but just because we were talking about that Potter's Field example, and so I am a Presbyterian pastor, and communion has always been really central in my life. And it was in that campaign that a number of the biblical scholars that are friends and colleagues of ours, really started to show that the first kind of early Christian communities that were gathering and enacting, the Last Supper and therefore communion were actually these kind of mutual aid societies, these burial associations of poor people. And that when we say we do this in remembrance of, that wasn't just like this figurative, spiritualized, practice, but it was actually that you would come bringing the names of those that we had lost, and that folks would then also commit to making sure that they were buried and taken care of, and that their families were. And that was a practice that we were enacting in welfare rights organizing in Philadelphia, and the Potter's Field campaign uncovered amongst unhoused people in New York. And that every time we serve communion to each other, and we every time we say we do this in remembrance of Jesus, um, uh, that he is one of many fallen fighters. That some of the 800 people that died just today because they were poor in the richest country in the world, and so, like, I'll remember you. Just becomes a different refrain, and doing this in remembrance of, we have to bring with us this kind of will to fight, for uh, a better world for everyone. That's what Jesus was about, and that's what other folks in this work have been about. Doing this remembrance of them.
See, now you changed what I was going to say. We do that often. But it is still a refrain that I want to build on with what you just shared. And in thinking about this, I think these rituals and why we do them, why we live them out in the world, is to remember that we aren't alone in the struggle. And I think that's a really important thing to lift up in these moments where things are so hard and people are feeling isolated and everything in our society is trying to be divisive, that we call for these kind of rituals to connect us and to give us courage to do something different. And so the refrain I would leave us with, we started in song, we're going to close that way, is a song that we've shared from the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. And it's a song called Courage, and it just says, "Courage, my friend, you do not move alone. We will move with you and
Thank
Amen.
you so much, both of you, for your presence, for this beautiful book. And thank you to all of the contributors who brought their creativity to bear. We are so enriched by this offering, and I hope that it is widely read and shared. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you for having us and letting folks know that it's out there, and yes, use it and share it and all of the things.
Cool. Thank you both so much.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of A Soulful Revolution. You'll find links to follow our guests and the resources they shared in the show notes. As always, A Soulful Revolution is entirely made possible by listeners like you. If you like what you heard today, please consider becoming a paid subscriber on Substack or sending us an appreciative gift on Buy Me a Coffee. Your solidarity helps us to bring more conversations like this into the world, and we're grateful. Our theme music was created by Richard Ashe, Andy McGantz, and Ben Schreiber, with production by Richard Ashe for Plus Ultra Audio. A Soulful Revolution is produced by Stephanie Whitehouse of SPW Design Media. We'll see you next time, Soulful Revolutionaries.